Welcome everybody. We're happy to see everybody on at least it's a bright, beautiful morning here in the Boston area, and I hope it's nice where you are. We're excited about this event, and we're going to start by getting a greeting from Mary Jo Callan, who's just become the director of the Swearer Center at Brown University, which has been a tremendous partner in creating this event. And you should know Mary Jo just began in this new role on Monday. So welcome, Mary Jo.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Ken. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, everybody. As Ken mentioned, I am in my third day as Executive Director of the Swearer Center, which is a hub for community and civic engagement at Brown University. Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone who made this event possible, from the media service technicians who are supporting us today, Jake LaFond, Shui Di, and Hannah Little, to Swearer Center staff members, Samani Valela and Kate Porter, who helped plan the event. And to everyone on the Brown Community Organizing Initiative, also known as BCOI, who developed this conference, especially Ken Goldston and Jane Beckett. As I mentioned, I only have 3 days of experience, so I'm not going to go into extensive detail, but I do know that Swearer Center's connection to BCOI goes all the way back to 2003. In one of our key collaborations, Ken and others in the BCOI worked with folks at Swearer to establish the community organizing digital archives within Brown's library. I encourage students and others here to check it out after this event. There's a lot of wonderful information about the activities of Brown alumni and others in the field of community organizing and social activism. I want to pause and take a moment to acknowledge that we are attending this conference during a tumultuous time here in the US and around the world. People joining us today on Zoom from not only different physical locations, but also with varied commitments, feelings, emotional and mental capacity for engaging in this work. However you're joining us today, I'm grateful for all of the organizers, the teachers, and the students who are taking time to participate today. I am looking forward to a wonderful afternoon. I'm going to try to attend as much as I can of shared teaching and learning. And now I'm going to turn it over to Marion Orr, who's a professor of public policy, political science, and urban studies at Brown University. And Ken Goldston, a Brown alumni and professional community organizer who created and runs the Brown Community Organizing Initiative. I'm going to turn it over to you two.
Very much. I run it with a bunch of wonderful people, so we want to honor them too. But just in the interest of keeping moving, Marion, are you?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. And Mary Jo, welcome to Brown. Look forward to working with you in the future at the Swearer Center. I'm happy to be a part of this event. We met back in December. And we had a wonderful and robust, engaging discussion with a good turnout of people interested in this topic of community organizing. And a lot has transpired since we last gathered. Lots happening. And I suspect we might talk about some of this throughout the course of the afternoon. You know, some of this stuff is not new, it's happening. But, you know, we had to, since December, we had this insurrection that occurred on Capitol Hill, effort to overthrow the democratic will of the people. That was a scary day, that insurrection. And since then, a whole lot has happened. Since the insurrection, we've had this tremendous backlash, that's what I'll call it, across the states, efforts to put into law efforts to suppress the vote, to make it legal to suppress the vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like Reconstruction period, it's very similar. Organized systemic effort. See, back in the when we had the Civil War, I grew up born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, and when we learned about the Civil War a lot in the elementary and high schools down in Savannah. I'm a Civil War buff because of that. And the pattern we see today is the pattern we've seen before. Before, it started with Mississippi, and then it passed throughout, the South. And this time it started with Georgia, my home state, native state, and, efforts to suppress the vote, to the democratic will, and to legally do it.
Right.
And then, of course, we had this situation with George Floyd. We got all excited. Because the system seemingly worked when you see a cop put his knee and kill a Black person, and everybody in the world can see it. And we got all excited because the jurors came back and said he was guilty of killing George Floyd, and so we are very happy about that. Isn't it? It's great. Yeah, and we continue to see the senseless, brutal murder of Black people in particular by law enforcement. Ever since then, we've had people killed by the cops. And then finally, it sounds great, isn't it? A lot is happening. Sounds really terrible, but this is what the reality we live in. We live in a reality of a white-centered society. America has always been a white-centered society. And I suspect it will be for a very long time. And then we had these hate crimes directed at our Asian brothers and sisters. A lot's happening externally. Meanwhile, as always, there's dedicated men and women working to see how we can transform and change some of these things. And since these things are happening, we've met, many of us here on the screen and Zoom, we've met, we've talked about how teaching might be able to be something we can do in a classroom to change some of these activities. We've got together in terms of professors from divinity and seminary schools talking about community organizing ideas. We tried to pull together students who might be interested in community organizing so they might in the future help us address some of these challenges that I just laid out. We've had a group led by Ken and Jane and others who worked to make this event happen today. We've also been blessed that the John Hay Library, here at Brown, has transcribed and subtitled the Don Elmer organizing interviews. I'm glad Mary Jo lifted the interviews and the archives up here at Brown. And so we've worked really hard to plan this event. So while externally a lot's been happening that really concerns us, internally, we have been as one, trying to pull this group together so that we can, think about organizing, community organizing in particular, its future and the role that students can play. And so I'm thrilled, Ken and Richard and others who've helped put this together to be a part of this. And so I'll be quiet right now and I'll let Brother Ken say something. But this is going to be a great event. And it's going to be a great event because we have put so much effort into it. And thank you. Ken?
Thank you very much, Marion. And as long as we're acknowledging people, Marion has been a key faculty member at Brown in all of the efforts that we've pulled together to create the Brown Community Organizing Archive. So we want to thank him. The members of the group at Brown that have worked on that include Jane Beckett, who's been mentioned, Bob Cohen, Katie Cohen, Jim Dixon, Don Elmer, Larry Gordon, Judy Hertz. Don Elmer has played a key role as well. And Richard Wood at the University of New Mexico has been absolutely critical to this as well. So we want to thank all of those people. We do want to particularly acknowledge again, Don Elmer, whose videotaped interviews, which he conducted when he worked with the Center for Community Change. It's a collection of 100 videotaped interviews of diverse organizers conducted in 2007, 8, 9. They're available online to anybody across the country, across the world. And above all, we want to make sure that people are aware of that for use in your own teaching, whether it's in the classroom or in the street. We also, again, do want to thank Jennifer Betts and Holly Snyder at the John Hay Library, who oversee the Brown Community Organizing Archive, which is open to receiving material from others. So why don't we keep moving? And we did want to acknowledge that, as you can see, this event is being recorded. And I'm told it's actually going to be available on YouTube through the Swearer Center's efforts and the Brown Media Services efforts. If you don't want to be recorded, please block your video, stop your video. All right, so it's so great to see everybody. And with that, we're going to turn this over to Katie Cohen from the Brown Community Organized Initiative. And Katie is going to help us connect with each other. So Katie.
Yeah. Thank you, Ken and Marion. So great to see so many faces, a few folks that I met for the first time last December, like Marion mentioned, and lots of new faces here today. So to begin with, welcome you to rename yourself and to include your name and also your affiliation. And if everyone can take a moment now to put in the chat your name, your affiliation, your role at that institution, and if you're joining us for the first time today. So we'll take a moment now to do that. And then we're going to break out into individual one-to-one meetings. It's one of the basic tools of community organizing, and we like to practice what we preach. So we'll do some of that for the next 15 minutes. I see Kisa is our first one in. Nice. There's Bobby Hackett. Great. Great to see folks from such different places, from our divinity schools, from our universities, from our community colleges, different organizing networks. Thank you, Larry, for including the IAF there. Awesome. So the last thing I'll say before we break out into our one-to-ones is throughout the day, if folks want to take a moment to put their interests, why they're here today, what they are hoping to get out of this convening or future convenings with in this kind of with this different kind of folks in the room, put that in the chat throughout the day, and it would be great to get a sense of why folks are here. And it looks like pretty much everyone has introduced themselves in the chat, so thank you for doing so. And Jake, I think we're ready to go into breakout rooms.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had some great conversations. My name is Rich Wood. I'm a faculty member at University of New Mexico and write about this terrain. So we're going to invite people into some breakouts in a minute. And I'm just going to do like a 5-minute opening frame to think about here. Trying to move us sort of in a forward-leaning way, thinking about where our teaching and organizing might go. And especially trying to bridge what's been a long-standing practice of community organizing into a new generation. And hoping to do this in a way that really grounds it in your own experience, your own analysis. So I'm going to talk about what I think of as 5 political opportunities that lie in front of us at this moment, and link those to 5 questions that sort of invite us in, and also 5 challenges that we will have to overcome if we're going to take advantage of those opportunities. So stick with me for 5 minutes, and then we're going to send you out into another breakout. So the first opportunity that I would outline is I think we're seeing in American life the full depth of white supremacy and white nationalism sort of on display and exposed, and in fact challenged in ways that have not been as clear in the past. And the question I would attach to that is, can we take advantage of this moment to actually root out that deep culture of white supremacy that's been so central to the American experience? The second opportunity I would flag is that the costs of economic inequality, the costs of the erosion of labor unions in this country are sort of newly on the national radar. And the question I would ask is, can community labor coalitions, can we build those kinds of coalitions in ways that take advantage of that new clarity about economic inequality to actually roll back the building inequality of American life? The third opportunity I would flag is that I think we're in a rare moment of a kind of deep rethinking of the cultural and institutional foundations of political life in this country. That is, when you think about politics, politics gets fought out on the train of culture and institutions. How we think about life, how we think about America, how we think about who we are and the institutions that shape us. I think there's a very deep rethinking of those cultural and institutional foundations, partly driven by the challenge of the Black Lives Matter movement. But it's also being thought about more deeply out of labor, out of community organizing. And can we take advantage of this moment of deep rethinking to build new foundations? That is, it's not a moment to go back to some idealized vision of democracy from the past, because we know how deeply corrupted that was. Rather, can we build some new foundations for democracy in this country? Fourth, I wanted on a flag, and especially do this with joy today, given some of the folks on the call, the courage and commitment of today's young adults. The students I work with, the students some of you work with, bring a kind of courage and commitment that's just absolutely compelling. And can we draw on that and build on the history and the experience of universities, and community colleges, and public schools as sites where democratic work has happened in order to meet those other opportunities I just described? And then the last opportunity I would put on our plate is, I think we do have a moment of a newly invigorated and a very healthily challenged Democratic Party. And can we combine a kind of visionary, forward-moving politics with smart, pragmatic governance in a way that takes advantage of the changes in the Democratic Party? Yes, in coalition with the right elements in other parties as well, but to do that sort of smart, pragmatic governance driven by a visionary politics of the future. So those are the opportunities I would flag. I also think we have some challenges, of course. The kind of deep dysfunction of governance in this country, a time when, because of the geographic polarization of Congress, and of state legislatures, that polarization rewards a set of right-wing naysayers to any of those opportunities that I've just described. And we're going to have to overcome that kind of dysfunction. Secondly, for the first time, probably since the post-Reconstruction era and Jim Crow, we have one major political party willing to govern based on systematic exclusion of huge chunks of our population and a kind of minimally veiled or open racism that drives that exclusion. Third, I would flag the role of money today. And here it's both an external and an internal challenge. Externally, the unlimited elite money in our politics coming out of recent Supreme Court decisions, but internally the way that so many of our organizations are dependent on foundations and the wealthy for the money that sustains us. And we're going to have to overcome both those challenges. Fourth, in particular, for the faith-based and broad-based organizing models that some of us work in, I think the challenge of the decline of congregation-centered religion in American life, and especially sort of liberal forms of religion generally, congregation-centered religion just no longer holds the central position, at least in a lot of young people's lives. And that's a deep challenge for the faith-based models out there. And then lastly, I just want to flag, and this may be less on a lot of our radars, that empires in decline are extraordinarily dangerous beasts. And I think the American empire is in decline in some important ways. And that creates extraordinary dangers for people doing progressive organizing. And we have to be thinking about protecting ourselves and protecting our own organizations, both through cybersecurity, for thinking about the kind of political and legal attacks that are going to come after us if we're doing good work, the risks of repression that folks in the Black Lives Matter movement face already. But we saw what happened to the Black Power movement. We saw what happened to the Civil Rights movement. I think we can't be naive. We have to think about protecting ourselves through the best assertive politics, but also by taking care of our organizations very carefully. So 5 opportunities, 5 questions, 5 challenges in front of us. I don't think we're necessarily going to focus on those things in the breakouts we're going to go into now, but we wanted to flag those as the context for our discussion as we're thinking about moving forward, building new organizing, building a new generation of organizers, and the way we teach that. We wanted some context for that. All right. Thank you for bearing with me for a few minutes. Jane Beckett, you're up.
Thank you, Rich. So with these big picture challenges and opportunities in mind, let me throw out a couple of interesting facts while we continue to the debate as to whether and how traditional community organizing must change, and how movement organizing can best reach people who are not particularly motivated by ideology. So fact number 1, almost all traditional community organizers started out as movement activists. And this was documented in Don Elmer's videos that you can view online. They switched to community organizing for specific reasons. And in Don's sample, several later went back into movement organizing. And fact number 2, the values and goals of several contemporary movements that are issue-based or identity-based are actually being adopted by many traditional place-based or faith-based community organizations. This would include immigrant rights, police reform, environmental justice, and others. So really, movement organizing and community organizing are and have been influencing each other in seen and unseen ways for a long time. So now we will be headed into randomly assigned breakout rooms to continue to reflect on these challenges. Please be sure to make sure that someone in your group is a note taker and report back person, because we'll be talking for about 30 minutes and then convening to report.
Now we're going to hear some report back, and Richard Wood and Marion Orr are going to help lead us. I'll just say I know I found in my breakout that one way to focus this discussion is to ask what's it like in the classroom for people who teach or for people who are learning, given what's going on in the country and the world. How's it shaping your experience this year that might be different from 2 years ago? So is it, Marion, I think you're taking the lead here.
Okay. We want to try to have some engaged discussion for a few moments centered around some of your reports in your breakout groups. What we want to do is call on individuals to get a sense of what your discussions were like, and we want to get some comments from a diverse group of people, from some who teach, some who are organizers, some of the students, so we can have a good mixture of and diverse conversation.
And can we ask folks to be really brief on these? We don't want to spend the whole next 40 minutes just on report back. If folks could just summarize really key points, and then we're going to engage in a broader conversation.
So I'm not certain who to call on because I don't know who was in the group. So y'all need to, you need to help me here.
I'm happy to start, Marion. I don't know if you can see me as Danny LeBlanc. I was in one group.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be really brief. There were 6 of us, and we sort of divided into a couple of quite a bit older veteran organizers and 3 quite young organizers starting out in the field, and 1 somewhere in between, I think. Hopefully I'm fair to Sean. And I guess our conversation centered on two things. One is, just what are the opportunities for young organizers to look at this as a career, as a vocation? Some people are happy and fine to do it as an avocation, but what are the real opportunities if you want to make this up and you want to actually live and put food on the table? And the other part of time we spent was on teasing out a little bit further this dichotomy or distinction, let's say, between community-based organizing and movement organizing. What's the connection? What's the crossover? What's the differences? That kind of stuff. So that's where our focus ended up.
You said the crossover between community organizing and what was the other?
Movement organizing.
Movement. Okay, thank you.
I can go. My group, we talked about, so there were a couple people who work at service learning programs and a couple people who are implementing kind of leadership development programs. And so kind of talking through, what it looks like to connect students and, maybe a more diverse group of people to the kind of skills and community organizing. We also talked about, doing this in a context where, funding can be difficult to come by and is often, governed by interests that, might not be quite in line with what communities want or need, right? So private foundations and or, kind of state funding and some of the challenges that, can arise because of, because of that.
Okay, thank you. Someone else want to volunteer to go next, please?
I can go next.
Okay.
So our group, we've touched primarily on the institutional foundations. And I think we primarily talked about how there's a sense of loss of trust in institutions. And this can be like institutions like churches, political parties, government, and how there's a sense of alternative institutions or ways of building trust around social media and demonstrations, but not so much in institutions as we know them, the traditional institutions. So I think, and my group talked about how we can think more about these new structures, right? And how also how, how in the old days, like, we didn't really talk about, race and capitalism. And now, we're entering into a stage where these issues are front and center. And at the same time, like, there's also a sense that we need to continue to engage young people, and education around, including history and civics, around how we could continue to build alternatives to institutions, and building trust too in the democratic process. So I hope that was accurate to my group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David.
I can jump in. I'm Laura, just because it's kind of tied in with what David was saying. So our group was a veteran organizer, a newer organizer, Alexis from Brown, and me. I'm a faculty member. And a couple different points. One, that we were talking about, to follow up on institutions at the university, how it is both limiting in terms of kind of political engagement and ideology, but also Myra was making a great point that it can be a place where students who are learning organizing can also develop a sense of identity when they've been otherwise, excluded or from marginalized communities, and can connect with other people who have that experience. So that I found that very encouraging. And then also Larry was making this other point that, because I was asking about this disjuncture between, we have this frightening time, and he was talking about the great peril and great opportunity. And so I was asking, how do we connect those things? And he was talking about the tools of organizing as being the practices that are necessary to sustain democracy, and that we have muscle memory for learning. He played the clarinet or, whatever you're doing, but that we can develop muscle memory for organizing too, for practices of democracy. And I just thought that was a really nice reminder for what this is about. So that's all. Thanks.
Okay, good. Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
I can go. So we had a number of kind of university people, faculty and staff, a student, and then a very veteran organizer. And we started out talking about kind of the last thing that was brought up, which was this tension between movements and organizing, and a little bit about like the civil resistance folks and the kind of different logics that they're laying out for civil resistance efforts versus organizing, especially this kind of organizing focusing on particular people as targets of power versus civil resistance seeing like shifting the perspective of the larger population as an effort to power, and how these two different logics lead to different ways of acting. And then a comment was made about like the challenges with these larger movements that like, who ends up as the leaders, and they can do things that are really problematic and not really support local people, for example, not supporting BLM, local BLM, not supporting Black Lives Matter. And then I think the last comment was made by someone who is trying to bring kind of like actual social movement training into a university that has like a minor in social justice, but no practical courses whatsoever, or community engagement courses in like questions of power or social action.
I can piggyback on that because it jives a lot with what we talked about in our group. So we likewise started off by discussing this movement and community organizing tension, and raising the question of how those two have been distinguished, sometimes perhaps too sharply, in the organizing tradition and the teaching of it, and whether that's still the case, or whether there is new cross-pollination going on, both within the field and within the academy. We talked about whether, we recognized a lot of students right now are being politicized within the academy, but the question was raised of whether those students are getting the practical tools that are a real strength of the organizing tradition: concrete power analysis, focusing on institutions, focusing on strategy for concrete victories, and being willing to compromise. And so we had some discussion about the extent to which that was or was not the case. Lastly, we talked about the role of labor in all of this and the extent to which labor is often neglected in treatments of organizing, and the question of whether labor is on the radar, particularly of young people who are politicizing. Whether, for example, graduate student unionization might be a vehicle for reintroducing students to that tradition. And that was where we left off.
In my group, there were 5 of us with kind of a wide range of experience, from teachers of organizing to organizers with community learning partnership, and child care workers in Detroit. And there was a kind of a dichotomy between those people who were in academics who were talking about students being very theoretical and into kind of identity politics and that kind of thing, contrasted to those people who are actually doing the organizing and working with people of color who spoke of the need to actually get involved in politics and seek power and those kinds of things.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
I can speak. Eiley, our group was, again, a collection of faculty, and we had a student organizer and a student organizer turned organizer. Some of the comments that we are all organizers, and the faculty talking about struggling to put organizing principles in all of our work and really working for the academy to be more based on democratic engagement. We talked about the anti-racism work on campus, and a couple of people talked about the conversation being really insular, so more about like syllabus review rather than talking about larger community issues or going out and working on community issues. BIPOC students being on the front lines in movement work, just here in the Twin Cities, I mean, every day almost doing mutual aid, and how a lot of the organizing work then seems very separate from that. Kind of talking about ethnic studies and how the history of that, I think that was brought up earlier, was really community-based, and thinking about how we can get back to that, as some folks were talking about being so insular. Student organizer talking about too, just the just how much our students are holding and the difficulty of getting their peers involved. But then our student organizer turned organizer really talking about in her context, students really holding most of this work with organizers and faculty and the institution coming in later, and how, starting in the community and then taking organizing principles to work on issues on campus, really then showing people the power of organizing was kind of how it worked in her context.
Okay.
I can go join in on that. My name is Kisa. Nice to see everyone. And kind of along those lines, our conversation kind of ended a little bit with what are the potentials and limitations for universities themselves to take the lead in this kind of work, given that they're committed to perpetuity. You know what I'm trying to say? The universities are not invested in dismantling the systems that created them. So there's a tension around that. And expecting administration or certainly the university itself to take that lead. We also were lucky to have in our group someone who is international, and so the importance too of these conversations having a global perspective, and for those who are Americans to realize how those in other countries may have different opportunities and challenges around organizing. But those are some of the, and then many of the themes that were already brought up about how do we actually teach folks to do this work. And maybe it needs to start at a younger age and not think about college, but how does recent efforts, even in Rhode Island, around teaching civics courses in high school, elementary school, really important as well. Thank you.
Just want to alert you that Peter Dreyer had put in the chat box, captured some of this conversation we're having here. Did everyone report back? Did all the teams go?
I have to go, sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Hi.
Hi. So our group had 3 community organizers of various organizations, and then I'm an archivist. So we talked largely about engagement issues, how to engage people, kind of, well, we started talking about like how to keep engagement in this kind of unique time and situation. And then we also talked about how to continue engagement in activist groups, how to engage more students and more people, how we could potentially use resources in different ways, and how we can create infrastructure to continue these kinds of movements. And then, yeah, and then as an archivist, I also talked a little bit about how we can like engage people in learning about community activism in a larger way. Thanks.
We were 5 in number. Three of us mixed movement backgrounds, organizing backgrounds, one longtime funder of organizing, one who went from the corporate sector into a civic engagement program at a community college, and then a younger person just recently off campus, now working in an archive program at a school. We similarly talked about people going from movement to wanting to do something that dug deeper and was more lasting. So that led them to look at organizing and becoming interested in organizing. And we also talked about people who started in intense identity politics as they got into lower income neighborhoods, recognizing that there's more involved that you gotta be attuned to if you're gonna organize there. And then we got into some discussion of the whole pronoun identifications conversation that's going on. And one of our members said, well, it wasn't so much students as it was faculty and staff at her institution. I think others have reported on other things we covered, so that's enough.
Thank you, Mike. Okay.
If there's not other report backs, I'm just interested in hearing from folks. What do you find compelling here? Where should we as organizers or teachers of organizing, students engaged in organizing, where should we be thinking forward into the future? I'd be especially interested in hearing from some of the students or younger organizers about what's really exciting here versus what comes off as those of us who've been around, still talking about the same old stuff is no longer interesting. And I'd be interested in hearing from some of the long established organizers for what might you feel like the next generation doesn't quite see that maybe is important to have on the table too?
Rich, you may have to start calling on people.
No. Okay, so I'll tell you what I tell all my students.
Very bashful group,
Yeah, no. I tell all my students, I'm preternaturally comfortable with silence. I figure it means people are actually thinking, and that's a good thing. So I'm fine sitting in silence for a minute while folks listen. I was very, very struck by something somebody said about the end of trust in institutions. That's deeply true for the students I teach. That sense that there's any institutions out there that they think one could lean on to actually build out of, they're pretty deeply alienated. And that's a real issue for the field, I think.
Yeah, Rich, I'll just add and just echo what you just said. What I've encountered over the years is a real, let me just say, when I do a lot of work, because I did field research looking at the Industrial Areas Foundation and their work across the country. And so I guess to some extent, my course here at Brown sort of focused a lot on the institutional based organizing. And I hear it every time I teach the course. My students in particular are, have real concerns about what some people call faith-based organizing and the role that the churches and congregations play. I mean, you can see in their body language how things sort of change when you begin to sort of, read some of the work that focus on the role of the congregations and organizing. And you can just sense the students, they get sort of like this tense up and they have real problems. That's number one. And the other thing I would say that I hear, and we picked this up in the chat box that Peter put in, is this this tension between, movement-based organizing and community-based organizing. Well, that's something else we hear a lot from. Mary, can you say from what resistance comes from? I'm not. There was a question in the chat box about where does resistance come from. What I'm saying to you is that when my students at Brown in particular read and hear that religious congregations are playing a fundamental role in organizing communities, I don't know what's so much resistance, just really, concern, because they've heard so, my students, what they hear more about is these sort of, what I guess, lack of a better word, sort of right-leaning efforts. And it sort of really frightens them. It really does.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is this. I just raised this question for the experts out there who do this work. And maybe it gets not be a question. It goes to this tension between organizing and this movement-based stuff. Is there any effort going on to train these young folk who are out here doing this Black Lives Matters organizing? Is there any effort to really grab them and pull them aside to get them to understand the basics of what we are talking about, community organizing? It's a basic question. You got all these young folk who are talking about activism in the community, and the question I raise, is there any effort locally to grab some of these young people who are interested right now in, efforts around police shooting and Black Lives Matter? Is there any effort to really teach them about organizing?
Yeah. Richard, I wonder if you don't want to hear from some of the folks who have been out in the field recently as part of that. You've got Arnie Graff, Larry Gordon, Judy Hertz on the Zoom, and I'm sure there are others whose name I don't recognize.
I see Don has a hand up there. Can I call on Don Elmer?
Please do.
Don. Unmute, Don.
I was fascinated by your question about the connection with community organizing and movement. One of the things that stands out to me personally is when I interviewed Arnie Graff, sometimes I just followed their energy instead of doing the rote questions. And it turned out, if you take a look at that interview, he went through his movement experience before organizing and went through it in specifics, and then came out with, I learned everything, what I learned in movement building, I was able to do in organizing. And one of the things that some of the history between organizing and movements that has been detrimental is the assumption that one or the other is right and the other is wrong. And we got to get over it. It's just bullshit. And so part of it is being humble enough in the community organizing piece of it to learn from what's happening in new movements that are out there, and not pushing them to do what we do, but simply listen and begin to form relationships that could learn, where both sides learn from each other. We even in our what do you call it, our training sessions early on in organizing. I was in organizing for about 45 years. It was very negative toward movements, to our detriment. And when we broke that rule, like when out of the TWO experience in Chicago, it turned into TWO, an all-Black organization doing voter registration that blew the socks off of the politicians in Chicago and made a huge difference. So I think we need a bit of humbleness on both sides so that we can actually gather together and work together.
So you're saying I should not be asking that question? Are we pulling people aside and showing them how to do? We just let them go and do their things. That's what you're.
Yeah, I think that's the outcome of our having a different attitude toward what is organizing, what is movement.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, should we take advantage of the fact that Arnie Graff is in this conversation and see what his reflections are about what Don Elmer said about what Arnie Graff said? Arnie, you're muted.
I'm mute.
Let's see.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted, but I think your connection's
I think I'm unmuted.
There you go.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Don, you got a good memory. That was a long time ago you interviewed me. I think community organizing moves in and out of even basic community organizing. Moves in and out of movement if it's true to itself. I can think of any number of times where, whether I was in San Antonio or Baltimore or a number of places, Washington, D.C., where we began a campaign. It came out of basic community organizing, listening, training sessions, house meetings, and so on. And the issue grew as we learned it more, and almost all of everything else stopped while we were in that, trying to push for that particular issue. So I think Don is right. I mean, I wouldn't. I think there was, I don't know if it still is, a negative feeling. People who were doing community organizing against movement. I think that's really foolish.
Yeah, I know Arnie is maybe in a more rural area today. Hard to hear him.
There's a whole rich conversation going on the chat line that folks be sure to pay attention to if you're if you're not. How about commentary from others? Reaction.
Something's wrong with the microphone.
Yeah.
Arnie, we're not hearing you.
I wanted to address Marion's point about, I teach a class on social action at San Jose State University, and several of my students are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. Go ahead, Scott. Yeah, so I have several students involved in Black Lives Matter, and they're in the class. This actually, I'm off writing a book right this year, but when Black Lives Matter kind of exploded in the last a year ago, maybe we can silence that because I can't talk over that.
Yeah, I'm trying to find Arnie so we can mute him, but I don't.
He is muted.
I muted him. Yeah, I'm not sure where that is coming from still.
Okay, thank you. Please be muted.
It's the delayed sound just playing itself out.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just to address that is that my students were involved in their activist work around campaigns that were going on, and then got involved in Black Lives Matter, and they were doing both. I mean, the question was, so absolutely Black Lives Matter played a huge role in that last semester I taught at San Jose State. And I think it's absolutely, I mean, they did not see it as separate. They saw it as totally connected to the work. And that continues on today. Both of those students continue to be involved in Black Lives Matter. So I think absolutely we should bring in and help train those students that are interested in the Black Lives Matter movement and train them in community organizing. And so they don't see that as they don't see it as separate. The question is that it's sometimes additive because they're working on other campaigns as well, and not to burn out our students is another issue that has to be addressed too.
But Richard, ask you one other thing, please. That I have a great concern about.
Okay, I'm trying to navigate all this, guys. So I think I saw Mike Miller with a hand print there in his screen. Am I correct?
Yes. A couple of things. I think about this movement versus organizing a little differently, but it has the same result. An organization has to address issues. And when you get in an issue campaign, you're mobilizing. A mobilization, like for an election, for example, to elect the Board of Education, can be an opportunity when the election's over to build organization, if you have that orientation to begin with. So it's not a contradiction. And SNCC, my years in SNCC, I thought, embodied the effort to struggle between those two ideas. I wanted to introduce another idea, but I don't know, Marion, whether you want to move on to something else now or not.
I'd like to, there's a couple of people backed up. I'd like to invite Janice Fine.
Hi. Well, I'll just say, I think in this group, we can all say that, you know, there are all these synergies and all these, you know, hybrids and all that. I think partly what would be interesting, though, is to talk about some of the tensions and some of the things that are coming up when we teach organizing. And that was, you know, the spirit of saying, of kind of posing it as movement versus organizing. So I'll just throw a few things out there. Not to say that, of course, all of us talk about movement and organizing, but I'll say some of what I see. I think that there's, we know that there's been a decline of membership-based organizations, and there is a tension between those that, you know, I see a move away from building membership-based organizations and asking people to pay dues. There's a lot of like celebration of movement and bringing organizations together. And sometimes I feel like you can't make a fist out of 5 broken fingers, right? And that it's really important to devote some time to thinking about organization building and what does that take? And, you know, Rich, you talked earlier about, you know, the sort of dependence on foundation money and what that means about, you know, where people look to for their support and what happens when people don't have to I mean, you didn't say this, but you know, what happens when people aren't turning to their members, right? Broad-based organizing didn't face this the same way because it was getting institutions to join, but the move away, the turn away from asking individuals to pay dues is just one example of where there's a tension, and where what I see is like very ideologically radical students who still at the same time have a kind of social worky attitude about poor people and what they can do. I think the other is, I mean, Peter and I have been talking about this, so I know Peter has a bunch of things he wants to add to it, but I think that there's some real tensions at this moment. And I'll just tell a story from one of my classes, because Marion was asking about, you know, do you teach these young people in Black Lives Matter? And, you know, the answer is, of course, Marion. But I'll just give you an example of a conversation I had in one of my organizing classes a couple of years ago. Right after Trump was elected and there was the huge Women's March, there was a meme that went viral on the internet of a guy standing on the sideline, a Black man holding a placard, right? You know, a picket sign, and it said, "Will I see you nice white ladies at the next Black Lives Matter protest?" And people were sort of like sending it around and kind of chuckling about it. And when I was talking about the difference between organizing, when I was talking about what organizing is, and that it's not about just speaking to the converted, and that it is about trying to start where people are and move them along, I gave as an example that meme, and that on first glance, one would think, yeah, you know, those white women, and why don't they, you know, da, da, da. But on the other hand, my feeling was probably a lot of people who see this meme, and a lot of white women who showed up at that march, who were radicalized for the first time by Trumpism and fascism, and, you know, and taking away women's rights, probably had no idea what this guy meant. You know, that it was like, it's kind of and I sort of talked about how in organizing, one of our principles is starting where people are. And, you know, and it got really hot. Another example is that I taught, I was giving a talk last summer to a group of organizers of color who were part of a leadership development program in the labor movement. And just offhand, I said, you know, we have to be clear that we're against market fundamentalism, but also what about the state, right? That we have to be clear that we're for the state, right? That we believe in a strong and vibrant public sector, and that we think, anyway, oh my God, I was just about tarred and feathered, right? In terms of like, you know, because in people's minds, like, you know, I'm thinking, you know, like sort of democratic socialism, you know, kind of the welfare state, and they're thinking the cops, right? And they're thinking about indigenous people being thrown off their land, like all that stuff, right? And so I mean, we can keep talking about how movement and organizing are the same, but I'm saying that I think we're in this moment where it's actually useful for all of us to really to have at this in a way, right? Anyway, so sorry for talking so long.
Hey, thank you, Janice. Wonderful comments. Peter Drive, please. Peter.
Hi, everybody.
Then wait, Peter, before you go ahead, after Peter, we want to get, can we get a younger person to comment? I'm going to say a younger person, let's say under 45. Okay. So go ahead, Peter.
Okay. I'm over 45. So
after Peter, yeah.
So building on what Janice just said in our conversation, where I think Zoe, the student at Brown, who's here, made a good observation. I think one problem is that students are suspicious of institutions, and they're suspicious of power. That if you have power, you must be doing something wrong. And there's a great little story in Cold Anger, in the book Cold Anger, about the IF, where they quote Lord Acton, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And then it says, yeah, but powerlessness corrupts even more. And I think a lot of our students just don't accept anybody in power. And so therefore, anything that looks like a compromise must be wrong. As opposed to understanding that compromise is a building block, depending on whether the compromise is a forward-looking compromise or a sellout. And they don't sort of make that distinction. And it's so it becomes kind of like revolution or nothing. Now, most students are more practical than that, but I have to say that I think there are, and I wouldn't count anybody in this room in this criticism here, but I think there are at least 2 generations of faculty, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, who think of themselves as leftists, teach about social justice, think about teach about dismantling capitalism, and they wouldn't know a picket line if they fell over it. You know, they have no practical experience. They don't know how the real world of politics works. And I think they are polluting a lot of our students in ways that are harmful. Most students see through it once they get into internships and see the real world. But, you know, to be a successful organizer, you have to be willing, as Janice said, to see where people are, to understand that, and also to say that, you know, a $15 minimum wage may not be a revolution, but for a lot of people, it's a big step forward. And I think a lot of our lefty faculty colleagues teach a whole different way of thinking. Like the civil rights movement really wasn't that successful because there's still a lot of racism and so forth. And it kind of delegitimates and disempowers students' sense of the importance of, you know, whatever you want to call it, movements, activism, organizing, and that history. And so I think that's a big dilemma. And once students get into the real world of organizing, they have to confront the reality that, you know, a lot of it's a slog, but it's a slog towards justice. And they don't appreciate the slog part.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Okay, per Marion's suggestion, we're going to create a moment for a under 45 voice. And then we're going to take a short break and we'll come back into some breakouts. Voices from folks who haven't passed their 5th decade, anywhere?
I think we have 2 folks. We have Nicholas and then we have Zoe, who we haven't heard from yet. So Rich, if we can fit in 2, that would be great.
Okay. Zoe, then Nicholas.
Yeah, hi. So I am a student at Brown. I just want to give that perspective, I guess. Just to go back earlier to like an earlier discussion we had about like training and the practical skills that youth need in order to organize. I think I agree. I think a lot of time it feels like we're continuously reinventing the wheel when I'm sure the older generations have the knowledge to create protests, to organize, to do all the things that we're learning as we go through very much trial and error. And that's something that we're continuously trying to combat through reaching out to mentors, to alumni, to people who have come before us. But there's very few people with the capacity to do so. And we've spoken a little bit about this disillusionment with institutions and the want to change institutions. And I think that we have to, I don't know how to phrase this correctly, but I think we sometimes have to marry this idea of like disillusionment with institutions and the idea that real change can happen without. Because one of the reasons that older people don't have the capacity to teach us anymore and that there are so few training programs and classes for us is that this trying to change outside of the institution and outside of existing systems is not one that's valued by, for instance, the nonprofit industrial complex, right? So I think that we can say that students need more practical skills, but at the same time, we have to recognize their frustration with the current training given, right? It's not just that students are disillusioned, it's that there is no opportunity for them to learn how to create change in the way that they want to create change. So I think there needs to be more listening on both sides.
Thanks, Zoe. All right, last word, Nicholas Hayes Mota, and then we're gonna take a 10-minute break.
Thanks, Rich. I'm not sure I want the last word, but I suppose I'll take it. I do agree both with a lot of what Peter said and a lot of what Zoe said. And full disclosure, Peter, Zoe, Janice, and I were all in one group. So our group has been speaking a lot in this space. But I think, you know, one thing I've noticed is that I think a lot of what Peter said is true, but there are a lot of younger people who may be initially politicized in movement contexts or via social media or in universities, who are looking for other sets of tools. And like working in a fairly traditional IAF organization here in Boston, I noticed a lot of young people who participated in the marches over the summer and then began to ask, you know, what more can we do beyond showing up to a march? And that was a perfect opportunity, if they were in any way affiliated with our member institutions, to say, you know, get involved in our police reform campaign, and get involved in building relationships with other communities you don't have access to through your own relational network, you know. And I've experienced a similar thing with my students. I just taught Cold Anger 2 weeks ago in my theology class at Boston College. And to go back to Marion's reflection, my students had a little bit of a different reaction. Many came in skeptical of organized religion, but looking at concrete examples of organized religion behaving in ways very different than what they may have experienced in their own lives or seen in the media growing up under the hegemony of the religious right, I think inspired some curiosity for them, you know. And I guess, you know, a theme of both of those remarks is I think there's more openness on the part of a lot of young people to learn about this history, about the practices of organizing, and there are natural points of connection. But I do think kind of meeting them where they're at, to what Zoe was saying, is important, is a principle those of us committed to organizing should take seriously. And I also think a big part of this that should be discussed is how much of, at least if we're talking about elite young folks from educated, affluent backgrounds, I think working class young folks have a different set of experiences. It's important to discriminate or distinguish here. But a lot of elite young folks are getting their politicization through social media. And I think that can be really destructive in conveying an idea of what politics is about. And I think that's another thing that should be highlighted in this conversation. Last thing I wanted to say, as a fairly institutionally anchored young person, in my case in the Catholic Church, I also think institutions have to recognize the full challenge of what we're up against and ask, you know, how can we make a case for our relevance to young people today? And I have a suspicion it's in the self-interest of a lot of our institutions to dig deeper into our own organizing practices, our own organizing history, to do that. That could be a pathway to relevance that, that connects to what some younger people at least are hungering for.
Excellent.
Okay, shall we take 10? People need biological breaks and all that. Please note the recent post by Abby, really important thought there. There's been a whole series of important thoughts along the way here. Encourage folks to look back at the chat line, please. Please stay. Oh, Ken, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I just say we can take 10 minutes as we promised. Everybody needs a bio break. We'll bump the rest of the agenda down by 10 minutes. We built in something of a cushion at the end. So the interest group breakouts will begin at 2:10 Eastern time. They'll go till 3:25 Eastern and so on. But I think we'll still have time to do all we want to do before 4 o'clock. And I'll just say this. The intensity of the discussion, for example, about movement and community organizing, there's opportunity in the teaching breakout to do a sub-breakout on that very question. So take a look at the breakouts. I think there's a chance to go deeper on some of these critical questions in the breakouts. All right, I think we're ready for a break and we'll see you in 10. So welcome back. Cynthia, why don't you put your question in the chat if that's okay?
Sure.
Welcome back, everybody. For people joining us for the first time, I'm Ken Galston. I'm part of the Brown Community Organizing Initiative. And we've had, I think, a lively discussion earlier today, starting at noon. We now have the opportunity to go into more in-depth and some of the questions that were raised in the earlier discussion, in the breakouts and in the group discussion. And we also have some new areas of focus in the breakouts. So let me just review with you what they are. We're going to ask you, we're told by the magic of the Brown Media Services team that you're going to be able to choose your breakout room, which is what we all want. So the breakout rooms that we've established, there's one on teaching community organizing in the classroom and in the field. Within that one, there are, if we are able to pull this off, we have 3 or 4 breakouts. One is to talk about race. One is to talk about this question of movement building and community organizing. One is to talk about the nuts and bolts of teaching, what the Bonner Foundation and Scott Myers-Lipton has been advancing, which is doing teaching by getting kids actually, or students organizing. And the fourth within that, if your interests are not covered by one of the other 3, is Rich Wood's going to help lead a workshop, more general discussion about teaching in the field and organizing. Janice Fine, Judy Hertz, Scott Myers-Lipton are facilitators of the teaching breakout. That's room 1. Room 2, Divinity and Seminary, Theological School, however you want to identify schools that help clergy prepare. Yeah, there we go, interest group breakouts. That is going to, Alexia Salvatierra is going to facilitate that together with others participating. 3, you can see students interested in community organizing, Katie Cohen, North Shore Labor Council, Jim Dixon, longtime organizer and part of our Brown Community Organizing Initiative team are going to facilitate that. Researching, archiving, writing about community organizing, Rob Kleidman from Cleveland State University, Frank Sanchez, a real activist in promoting archiving of community organizing materials, are going to help facilitate that. Diversifying teams of organizers, Sheila Balke and Rosa Garcia from the Community Learning Partnership, which they'll tell you more about. That's an effort to get community organizing taught in community colleges, and that seems to be one of the more likely ways to diversify the organizing team across the country economically and probably most likely racially, ethnically. Not the only way, but one way. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to, if this all is going to work right, we have the next opportunity. You'll see on your screen an opportunity to choose one of the breakout rooms. So before we go to that, make sure you know which number you want and then choose that room. So Katie, do you want to lead us in this next little section here?
Yeah, I think the next section is we're just going to have, we don't have a lot of time left, but we wanted to get some reports from the breakout groups folks were just in. I apologize to my group. I was in the middle of a last story before we all got called out about organizing in a blizzard and students all coming out even though classes were canceled and there's a lot of snow, and how important action is. So we have, does any group want to begin? Just tell us, you know, what you were hearing, something interesting someone else in your group said, your thoughts on next steps for your groups, if there are any.
Yeah, so we can go first since we came back to the main room first. So our group focused on diversifying, teams of organizers. And so some of what came up in the conversation was that it's really important to pay people a living wage. If you're recruiting people of color and young people from low-income communities, it's really important that there's a career pathway where they actually can get a job that actually pays them a living wage. And there was one member of our group who really talked about her experience. She has multiple jobs. I don't know if you want to jump in, Abby, at any point, and how difficult it is for young organizers, just to pay the bills. And so that was a really important point. We talked a lot about community change career pathways at community colleges. And some of the folks in our group, were not familiar with our programs. And so in terms of next steps, Massachusetts, you know, there are community colleges there that might be interested in speaking with us. So that was a pretty exciting outcome. And, you know, I'm gonna open it up to other members of the group if they wanna chime in and just highlight any of the other points that people made.
Yeah, I was going to add too, I think Ken made a really important point in our group about one other group member. I think Bob asked how many folks who participated in the program were leaving to become professional organizers. And we just talked about how for a lot of young organizers, the title doesn't really matter. Like a lot of folks are servers or are working, you know, multiple other minimum wage jobs, but are doing so within this ethos of just trying to fund their own organizing activities. And meanwhile, we do a lot of other organizing for free where we're not getting paid by any institutions, but essentially, so our titles might not be professional organizers, and a lot of folks might not consider themselves professional organizers, but really they are, because they're using their paychecks just to, you know, to fuel their other organizing efforts. And just that reframing and that shifting from that singular definition of what organizing looks like, or what being an organizer means, especially in an economy that doesn't value the labor of organizing the way it should, was just really, really important and was a good discussion for sure.
Great.
And also, last thing is that it really ties into diversifying the field of organizers too. If we start to think of all people who are working those kinds of jobs to organize as being organizers, then the potential for who can really participate in that commitment or in that work really widens and really does diversify the field.
Shalea, any thoughts?
Well, should we?
Oh, you know, I think we actually need to move on to another group time-wise. So, yep. If anybody, feel free to put things in the chat. Yep.
Thank you.
So I can share about what we talked about in Scott's group about teaching social action. And so two things really came up for us is like, how do we build momentum across campus? Like in the sense of like, you're doing a social action project on campus with students, you're gonna also create some tension with some administrators on campuses. So Scott shared kind of how he navigates that space of like, yes, he is a full tenure faculty member. So he's got a little bit of breath to be able to do that kind of work. But also, he makes sure to be transparent with his dean in the sense of like, here are the action projects that are coming out of my class. This is what you can kind of expect. But also we talked about just briefly at the end, the language of service learning and how sometimes some faculty are not, have misperceptions of like what service learning should be and how we should really see it as like a spectrum of engagement, of like community engagement to an extent. Because really social action is, I would say in my view of like what I'm doing in my research is that it happens after service learning. It's the civic engagement, it's the democracy, it's where we want students to go once they graduate. And so I think bringing it back to our conversations, like you want to definitely acknowledge that there are going to be some tensions and frustrations that come up, but it should be welcome because it's the kind of conversation that students are going to confront when they go into the community when they graduate. And so creating a space on campus for them to have those conversations, to challenge their own assumptions and biases, but also you as a faculty member not overstepping, but kind of facilitating students through that project is really what you want to be able to do. And what's really cool is that Bonner has been able to kind of pilot this through student-led teaching of social action classes. And so students, non-tenure faculty members, lecturers, and maybe even community members can also foster these conversations on like, how do you get students involved both on and off campus? So I'm not sure if anyone else, Myra, do you want to share anything? Did I capture it? Maybe.
Awesome. Was there, I think there's different subgroups from this teaching breakout, if I understand it correctly. Do any of the other subgroups want to share?
Yeah, I can report on Judy's group. We're looking at teaching community organizing during a movement moment. And start off just looking at the tensions as well as the opportunities of movement and building structure. Taking advantage of the energy that comes with the movement, how to connect students with skill development. And I think we had a consensus in the group that students are really looking in large part for that skill development and nuts and bolts, really working that way. How to do that? We talked about no one model. A school of social work where I happen to be teaching, we have a requirement for internships, 720 hours, 3 days a week for 2 semesters. That's very different than Scott's class where you're doing a really exciting project, but there's not a required internship. Or Peter's class at Occidental with is a different model of internships. So there's no one right way to do it, but ultimately we're looking at praxis. Ultimately, we're looking to connect some theory with street experience. My own experience, I learned to organize before I went to school and did any of the theoretical stuff. That's one route. In other situations, we have folks getting their first taste of organizing in a grassroots class, undergrad or grad school, or going to a training at Midwest Academy from a grassroots organization and then going back and perhaps pursuing education after that in a more formal setting. So a lot of different roads to it. And, you know, it gets back to the old cliche about structure should follow function, not starting with a particular model, but tailoring the situation to what's the constituency, what's the issue. Different situations are going to require a different approach to doing the organizing and a different approach to teaching about it. But always trying to connect the basic theoretical grounding and understanding power, understanding the difference between organizing, building a structure and a movement, understanding the difference between what Gary Delgado calls a single issue mobilization as opposed to building an ongoing structure. Stop there and see if folks in the group want to jump in.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if we could hear from either the divinity group or the students group or the research group.
I was asked to report for the divinity school and seminary group, and I would say that we were a small group, and we began by just introducing what we're doing at our schools in terms of what courses are being taught or what trainings are being offered and what kinds of field education is being offered and what challenges we face. And it turned out to be a pretty rich variety of kinds of approaches. Some schools having a course in community organizing, others having a training, others having a hybrid of a course and a training. Most of what was being done was some kind of hybrid of aspects of a 5-day training and aspects of an academic course. Some of the challenges that are faced in seminaries and div schools, we identified those as both institutional challenges and then challenges that the students bring. And institutional challenges included the challenge of community organizing not being taken seriously enough as academic enough. Some institutions had the challenge of it not being considered as a required course, whereas in some of the institutions, the course/training in community organizing is actually a required course for all master's students. The challenges that students bring really included the differing degrees of suspicion about self-interest, that many people in the church have been taught to see self-interest as bad. Suspicion of power, because many people in the church have been taught to think that power is bad. and also difficulties with agitation, because often people in the church are taught to be nice and agitation doesn't feel nice. So we talked about various ways that we have worked with those challenges, particularly looking at them theologically and really reframing power and reframing self-interest and reframing agitation, working with them theologically and also biblically. And I think the other thing is, one of the variations was different kinds of and degrees of collaboration with local affiliates of the networks. I think most of the programs that were represented had one form or another of collaboration with a local affiliate. And then we talked about follow-up, and we didn't make decisions, but I think that there was a lot of interest expressed in continuing to be in touch, particularly around shared resources. We did some really rich sharing of documentary types of resources and written resources, and we'll probably, and syllabi. And so we will be gathering a document that shares a lot of those resources.
Great, and since that's perfect. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we have to move on, but that is the great segue. So we have a shared Google Drive that we started after the December convening that we had. On there, you'll find syllabi, lesson plans, templates for things, bibliographies, film lists. We encourage you to add to that Google Drive. We'll have, after this, we'll have the participant list with people's emails and affiliations on the Google Drive. So if you want to contact each other, of course, if you don't want to be on that list, let us know. As well as if you would like to put in a little bio for yourself. So folks can search that through the Google Drive. So I just dropped that Google Drive link in the chat. We have to hear from the research group. I believe that was Jane's group.
Okay, yes. To be brief, we were 4 academics, 2 archivists, and 2 organizers who have donated their materials to archives. And so we focused, for one, on archiving and had a lot of interesting issues to lift up. We also ended up sort of exploring the idea of how researchers could form a more solid, a more institutionalized network, and possibly publish together. More to follow.
Ooh, very good. Did any, Kechi, sorry.
Hi, yeah, Kichi. So, yeah, good. My group was in the teaching one, and it was a subgroup of it. So it was led by Janice Fine, and we were talking specifically about race and the challenges that we face with teaching around that issue. And so our group, we had like about 6 people, and some of the things that came up were how to get students to feel confident and powerful in using their voice, and then funding issues, and then breaking through the awkwardness of talking about race, and inviting people into discussions so that it's not all silence. And so those are some of the things that we had talked about and discussed. And yes.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I believe we have 1 minute if anyone from the students group wants to jump in. That's okay. If not, we can move on.
They're obviously blown away by your teaching. Isn't there somebody from the student group that would like to comment?
Hi, sorry, I'm having some technical issues, but I can pop in. Sorry to not have my camera on. My internet's not the most stable thing in the world. But I was a part of the student organizing group, and we were able to discuss the various organizing projects that are going on among students that are in this call, and kind of have discussions about how organizing can play a part in transforming those projects to get true lasting change, and start some conversations about tactics and strategy, and how to move forward. and continue doing this work to actually create change.
Great. All right. Well, I think if
add one more thing to that, I will say one of the questions that came up in our group was, and it relates to what Abby brought up, but how do you make this a sustainable career, right? So if you want to be organizing full time, you don't want to have to work your day job and then do it in your free time, but you feel really compelled to be making this what you do with your life, and you need to get paid for it. And we talked about the different networks that hire organizers. So for a lot of those folks who are connected to these networks or places where one could get a job organizing, we're not in that breakout group. But if you are connected to one of those networks and you're looking for some talented organizers and you want to connect with some folks from this call, put that information in the Google Drive too. And so we can keep connecting students who are interested in careers in organizing to good organizing jobs that pay.
Very good. Well, thank you, Katie, and thank the group. And we're in the home stretch now. Before we go on, I just noticed that Jennifer Betts has joined the call. We gave her a shout out at the start of the meeting, but Jennifer and Holly Snyder, who's still on the call, thank you again for your role at the John Hay Library and helping the archive sustain itself, grow, and be a support for us. Really
sure, great. It looks like you had a wonderful turnout, so this is really great.
I think we have. It's been a good day, I think, and thank you. So for this last section, Rich Wood and I are going to help us just talk briefly about next steps before we then hear from Marion Orr by way of a closing. And I thought maybe we could do this in two ways. Rich, do you want to take just a couple of minutes to either try to summarize some of what's happened, or in some other way offer some of your thoughts about possible next steps? And then practically speaking, I'd like to at least test out with the group whether there's energy to reconvene at some point in the future. And we had a couple of thoughts about timing on that if the group does want to do that. And I'd like to get some basic sense of the group.
I think it's been a rich enough day, and I've had enough say. I don't want to reframe anything at all. You know, maybe a 20-second thing on really thinking forward about the deep challenges and what's going to position this field down the road 5 and 10 years, as opposed to, you know, I fall into thinking semester to semester all too often. Beyond that, I don't have anything more to offer. Thanks.
Okay. All right. The wisdom of brevity. So thank you, Rich. So I think what we wanted to do, just to recap for the people who are new to this call, a number of people on this call were with us when we first did this in December, last December 7th. And there was a lot of good energy coming out of that call, both about the general convening of people, but then there were 4 or 5 groups, as Marion referred to, who did their own subgroup meetings in between. So the Divinity School, Theological School group had their own subgroup meetings. Research did the same, and so on. I think what we want to test out for this call, and I realize that not everybody who's participated today is with us, but you're a good group to test this out. Is there energy? Do you find this useful enough that we should consider doing a similar meeting again in the future? The earliest I would think that we would propose doing it would be next December, this coming December, again, probably by Zoom. But conceivably, you might say, yeah, it's a good idea, but why don't we go out further still? So I'm just curious whether people think that a general convening like this that brings together people who approach teaching community organizing in the classroom and in the street, researching, archiving, writing, and so on, whether people have any thoughts about that. Anybody want to offer any instinct about, I know it's the end of a long day, you may be tired, but did you find this useful enough that you might want to, you could conceive of it being useful to come back again this coming December? Anybody want to share anything? I'm going to start calling on Lee Staples. Do you have any thoughts about
I thought it was really energizing and a lot of good ideas going around. Nice to hear a lot of different perspectives. I would hope if you do it again, we can get more younger folks and help get that generational linkage strengthened further. But this was a great start.
Okay, good. Anybody else want to start speaking up at all? Janice,
I appreciated making connections with people, and I expect I will be following up on those connections. And I think if you do it again in December, there might be new people for me to connect with that could help me do my work, and maybe I could help them do theirs.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Janice, I always value your opinion. Any thoughts about this?
Ken, it's Bobby again. I know you organized some special focus sessions between the last big one and this big one.
Right.
And I would encourage you to keep looking at that and surveying people, because I think then people can go deeper in a particular aspect of it.
Yeah. So put more energy into that. I see, Janice, you're shaking your head. And would you say, yes, Janice?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking along very similar lines to Bobby, which is that I think just coming together to have very general conversations, you know, nice to see everybody. I love seeing who's teaching organizing. Having each of the times we come together be a focused, you know, much more focused on a few different things, to really go deep on, I think would be much more compelling for busy people, you know, to want to do it. So, you know, I think that there were some topics today that there was some juice on that people could come together to talk about. And then, yeah, Bobby's idea about, you know, just that there are affinity groups of people that really need to go deep on something in particular or might want to, I think makes more sense.
Sure. Okay. No, that sounds good too. Thank you for that. Are other people drawn to, why don't we try this? Are other people drawn to what Bobby and Janice are saying? Put more energy in, I see Michelle has a thumbs up. Yeah, we could actually do thumbs up. Put more time into subgroups around specific topics. I see Scott McDougall's got a yes. Rich Wood says yes. How do you like that? Who else? Anybody else? Oh, Ken Rowling, yeah. Can you give me either a thumbs up or electronically, or I see Aaron thinks so too. Nicholas, great. Rachel, Jim Dixon, okay. Eddie Torres, all right, good. Well, I think that may be a good indication. I think if we were to do that, then we could test out, you know, is there some time in the future when we do reconvene? And who knows exactly when, right? That might be a year from now. That might be, who knows, maybe never, but we could test that out.
And I might have misunderstood, but I understood the suggestion to be not, instead of convening in December, it was more a suggestion to focus at a December convening on some conversations. That's what I was saying yes to.
Oh, well, wait. So,
Ken, I think the idea was that two things, that convening us occasionally will be much more exciting if we choose a topic to go really deep on.
Oh, I see.
A topic or two.
I see.
Right. So that's what I would do next December. And then Bobby's suggestion about, you know, I don't know what kind of capacity the BCOI has, but to support the deeper dive organizations that have been convening or whatever makes sense to me.
So just to clarify, first of all, BCOI is like deep pockets. We're rolling it. No, not really. So let's go back. So just to clarify, we're saying perhaps reconvene in December, but have it be on a central topic. That's one aspect, right? And then, but we're also saying that if there's a subgroup like the people who teach in theological seminaries want to have their own separate meeting, to the extent that we can provide some logistics on that, work with them on that. Yes? So how many people think that that idea is a good, how about shaking your head? We could do that. Okay, good. Larry Gordon, what do you think? You're part of our team. Do you have an instinct on this? Wait, you're muted though. Okay, Larry, come back. Larry, are you with us? Unmuted? Oh, there you are. Larry, unmute yourself. There you are. But Larry, we can't hear you. Okay, not Larry. All right, how about one of the younger people? How about Abby or Zoe or Ikechi or somebody else? Who else wants to speak to this? Anybody quickly? Or Cynthia, do you want to say anything about that idea?
I was going to say, I really agree with what Janice said. I would add to that too, that I think it could be powerful. Like we talked a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement and organizing, for example, and at least in Cleveland and in Denver, there's lots of organizing going on by Black Lives Matter organizers. And so I think that could be a way to kind of focus the discussion, as well as to, if we want to talk about like specific organizing strategies that Black Lives Matter has employed, maybe inviting an organizer from a local context to talk about how they've created such a huge, or I guess the folks who participate in Black Lives Matter organizing have created such a broad movement of participation. And yeah, just kind of doing some like movement specific, they're not quite trainings, but like ways to share ideas of how we get organizers paid and things like that, I think could be a really effective way to focus the discussion in the way that Janice was talking about.
Good. Who else? Somebody I'm not calling on want to say anything? We just have a few minutes left. Okay. Well, any other, why don't I now then, if that's given us enough guidance, if you feel strongly other ways, either put it in the chat or reach out to us in other ways. I see Rosa Garcia is supporting what Janice has said, for example. All right, well, thank you very much for the guidance. And Marion, or do you want to close us out?
Oh, wow. The day went by so quickly. I enjoyed this. This was really, I think, a really, really robust and energetic group discussion throughout the day. And Ken and others, I'm glad we're going to see how we could follow up on this perhaps in December or at some other point. Okay, with that, I'm just going to be quiet and say, have a good day, and we will be following up in the next, in the future. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.